For your information, we will be recording this webinar. So if any of you would like to have access to the recording after the fact, please let us know, and we will make the recording available. SelectHub is fundamentally a technology selection management platform. And that's quite a mouthful just to explain what that is. Technology selection is something that every organization does, whether it's hardware, software, IT services, even telephony and telecom. All of these components, organizations go through a certain workflow. They spend millions of dollars every year on different kinds of technology. And often, the entire process, right from gathering requirements to researching vendors and all the way to doing an RFI or an RFP, is something that many organizations do manually using a lot of Excel and Word. And what SelectHub does is it offers a very prescriptive cloud-based solution for addressing that whole process end-to-end. And the value that SelectHub delivers is that oftentimes when you look at an RFI or an RFP, it can take several months. On minimum, it can take 3 to 4 months. And with SelectHub, you're able to accelerate the process and get the RFI or the RFP done in a matter of weeks instead of months. So fundamentally, that's the primary value proposition. And as you can imagine, there are a number of side benefits, such as part of the process, you are able to get a complete audit trail and end-to-end view of the whole process. People are able to collaborate and make a more informed decision. And the way we deliver a lot of these benefits is that when you look at typically the 3 problems that I described earlier, number one, there are too many manual time-consuming processes in the technology selection space. The limited visibility and IT and procurement often struggle to provide value during this process. So what I mean by that is if you look at the typical technology selection process, as I alluded to earlier, it starts with requirements gathering. Then the stakeholders start to do some research about what are the products out there, what are the vendors out there. They may do some informal inquiries. They may do an RFI or an RFP. Or if it's not an expensive, let's say it's a 4-figure or a 5-figure project, and it's all cloud-based solutions that you're evaluating, you may end up requesting a demo from the vendors, and so on, all the way to contract negotiation and close. So when you look at how the process is implemented, it's all Word documents and Excel spreadsheet, which fundamentally creates a set of fragmented data sets. There is no centralization of all this data. There is no auditing capability. There is no full transparency. Even if basic questions like, are the right people participating? Who is providing these requirements? What is the relative priority of requirement A versus requirement B? Even those basic questions require you to go through several emails, Word documents, and Excel spreadsheets to understand where all that data is coming from. Number 2, the second problem we talked about, which is a limited visibility, let's take a deeper look at that as well. Oftentimes, when you look at technology selection, there is a whole bunch of scattered steps. What I mean by that is, for instance, the head of HR or the head of marketing may go to an industry conference. They come back and tell the procurement team or the IT team that, hey, look, a lot of our peers are using XYZ product, and we would like to use that too. So much too often, IT and procurement often is brought in at the tail end of the process where the decision is already made, and there is not an opportunity there to really influence the type and nature of decision that gets made. And sometimes, there is a lot of maverick spend, rogue spend. Often we call that shadow IT, where IT and procurement is not even in the loop until after the purchase has been made and it's time to implement that product. And last but not least, we talked about IT and procurement often struggling to provide real value, tangible value to the business. And that's understandable. For instance, if you look at this graphic on my PowerPoint, you can see that just taking a very common technology category, let's say business intelligence or big data analytics, you see that there is a lot of vendors, a lot of products out there. The amount of market data intelligence out there is staggering. So how is an IT team or a procurement team able to come to the table and engage the business unit that is looking for a solution with a meaningful set of data? how is the IT and procurement team able to speak the business unit's language? So as you look at this kind of ecosystem, what SelectHub does is we solve all three of these problems. Number one, the prescriptive workflow that I mentioned, that helps guide the business unit, that helps bring all the stakeholders together across all these different department silos, different department heads, different team members to the table, and guides them through the process of step A, step B, step C, depending on the business rules that IT and procurement have set up. The flip side of that is the seamless audit trail. So fundamentally, anything that happens it's all recorded automatically, and it's available to go back to for reference. Or for instance, when you look at somebody saying, look, I didn't say that, or I didn't mean that, you can always go back to the audit trail and show them exactly what transpired. And similarly, it also provides some protection against legal exposure, legal liability. So that's also something that SelectHub helps. Last but not least, from a vendor perspective, we also onboard the vendors, and you are able to extend the level of collaboration. The workflow extends to the vendor community, where you can communicate with the vendors either anonymously or through a structured RFI or an RFP and get the data and the scoring you need to make a decision. So that's how the prescriptive workflow addresses the scattered nature of the process and removes a lot of the fragmented tools like Word and Excel. The third problem we looked at, which is IT and procurement not being able to add tangible value, a way that we address that is through the making certain subject matter expertise, certain domain knowledge available out of the box. Let me give you an example. So within SelectHub, you have a set of requirements for over 100 different technology categories available at the click of a button. So every time a new technology selection starts and people are thinking about the requirements, they don't have to start from scratch with a whiteboard every time. They can click a button, they can get the top set of requirements in the industry that organizations like theirs often consider, and we make that information available within SelectHub. Similarly, based on those requirements, you can also get a better feel for who are the top vendors, which are the top products, and how do they meet each of those requirements. That's the other thing that SelectHub makes available as part of its leaderboard and as part of its scorecard. And that information is also something that saves a lot of time, that avoids your internal team having to do all that research yourselves, which can take multiple days or multiple weeks even, makes it available at the press of a button. And number two, you're also able to separate the wheat from the chaff. In other words, if you look at a typical Gartner report or a Forrester report, or you do your own research, you may find that there are 40, 50 vendors in a given technology category, whether it's software, a particular kind of software or hardware or what have you. And a report like this, based on the requirements that are relevant for your organization, you're able to see which vendors and products best meet those requirements. And accordingly, you can separate the wheat from the chaff, and you can focus on the top 5 or top 10 vendors that really matter for your evaluation. Again, saving you time and money and helping you make a more informed decision. So let's go into the product, and I'll show you exactly how we do that. As part of this demo, you will see that there are 2 separate product offerings we have. One is called Selector for IT, which helps you do all the internal collaboration, go through the workflow process with all the internal stakeholders within your organization. The second one, called Selector for Vendor Sourcing, is an add-on component that helps you onboard the vendors, deal with the vendors, do an RFI or an RFP, and extends the communication and the interaction to the vendor community. Whether you're requesting a demo, whether you're doing a full-blown proof of concept or an RFI or an RFP, you can do all of that on the latter product package. With that, let me go into the product and showcase some of the capabilities that we talked about. So here I am within SelectHub.com, and I have logged in. I am here in a demo environment within SelectHub. So when I log into SelectHub, I see a dashboard here. It's a very basic dashboard that tells me what is the workflow I need to follow, so I'm never lost in terms of what to click on next. I can also see a list of all the projects that I have created, that I have access to. I can also see here requirement scorecard, requirement templates, and I'll click on those and I'll walk you through what those are here in a minute. But Let's start with a bird's eye view of all the technology selection projects that are going on that I need to be aware of. And as a manager, as a senior manager, or as an analyst or an architect, we often have to keep our eyes on multiple projects, and especially if you're in procurement or sourcing, having that capability to look at everything also would be very helpful. So when I click on the executive dashboard, what I see is what are the potential problems that may exist across all my projects. And I can do a trend analysis over the last year, over the last 30 days, and I can zoom in on the projects which have serious issues. So for instance, I can see here that the average rating across all my projects, the average health rating is about 41%, which is rather low, so it shows up in red. I can also see here that I've got about over $1 million worth of investments being evaluated. I can scroll down and I can click on what are the projects that might have critical issues, and I can zoom in on those. So for instance, here I am looking for a shopping cart software, or somebody in my organization is looking for shopping cart software. And that project has a health rating of 38% with 7 issues. I can click on those issues and see who is running that project, what are some of the issues that might exist. For instance, there are too few stakeholders. The budget seems to be unapproved. IT is not participating. The requirements seem to be biased. And the way SelectHub is able to flag these issues is that as you're using the project, as you're going through the workflow within SelectHub, we are able to run certain analytics in the background, and we are able to highlight potential issues. For instance, in the case of biased requirements, I just have to place my cursor on the question mark, and it tells me why it has flagged that particular project. It tells me that the entire set of requirements have come from a single stakeholder, potentially introducing bias. Now, if I want to contact the person who's running the project, I can click on the contact button. But if I want to zoom in into a project, I can certainly click on the project, and I can go in there. Let's go into a sample project, a demo project that will highlight some of the benefits that we talked about earlier. So here is a CRM, a customer relationship management project. I can click on it, and if a group of folks are going through the selection process, I can see who they are. I can see a snapshot here, how many requirements have come in, how many products or vendors are being evaluated, how many scorecards exist, how many RFIs and RFPs have been created, proof of concepts, and so on. Now, the first thing I want to see is what's the latest scoop with this project. So the project activity, it's kind of a bulletin board that keeps showing me everything that's going on within this project. If I want to see a more detailed audit trail, all I have to do is click on the history screen, and it tells me who did what since the inception of the project. So if someone added a new requirements, I know about it. Someone removed a requirement or changed the priority of a requirement, I know about it. If someone did an RFI or an RFP, I get that information. So everything is available in one central place, and we keep that information for a minimum of 7 years so that you can access it for any e-discovery or liability issues that may come in down the road. Now, the first thing I do once I have a project created is making sure that the right stakeholders are participating, whether they are IT people, whether they are finance people, procurement and vendor sourcing, or somebody on the business side. I can make sure that the right folks are there. And equally importantly, I can make sure that the right people have the right roles. So for instance, when I'm inviting, let's say, somebody from our QA department, when I click on their name, all I have to make sure is they have the right role. And there are several roles available out of the box, such as procurement officer, project manager, project participant, and the role decides what they can or cannot do within the confines of this project. For example, if you are a procurement officer, you can reach out to vendors, you can do a new RFI or an RFP, whereas if you are a project participant, you cannot do that. And all of these roles and the descriptions are laid out in the help screen. Now, once you have the right people participating in the project, the next thing you do is go over to the requirements and start collaborating on what are the requirements that are relevant for this project across all the different silos, across all the different stakeholders. The objective is to give a mouthpiece to every stakeholder that is participating in the selection project. So no more Word documents, no more email, no more getting lost in all of that data back and forth. Everything is centralized. So the way you start out by in identifying the requirements is you choose what technology category are you interested in. In other words, what technology category is this project going to be evaluating or selecting? We have over 100 different categories and subcategories, whether it's a business intelligence solution, whether it's an application development, or an ERP solution that you are looking to implement. You can choose the category, and once you have done that, in this example, we have chosen the customer relationship management software, which is CRM. Once you have chosen that, a magical thing happens, and that is all the requirements start coming in. The requirements can come from a variety of sources. For instance, we talked about templates that SelectHub makes available. So when you have this project created, you can go through our library of templates for this category, and you can click on Preview button to get a read-only version of all the requirements that are popular in this category that your peers in the community at other organizations like yours might be using. So you can click on that, and you can scroll down and see, are there requirements that are relevant to your organization? And if the answer is yes, you can click on this button, this red button that says import those requirements. So immediately you get those requirements in here. You can then go about editing them, customizing them, and changing them as you see fit. The other thing you can see here is each stakeholder that is authorized to enter requirements can click on Add Requirement, and they can put in their own requirements as well. And here's how that works. You can see that there is a requirement heading, there is a detailed description, and there is a priority. So every stakeholder can say whether this requirement is relevant for them or not. Now, as people are doing that, as the different stakeholders log in here, go through the requirements, and put in the relative priority, you can click on the team priority. You can take the cursor there, and you can see how different people have voted. So for instance, David Dawson in this example, he is part of our delivery team. He has given this a high priority. Stephen, who is part of our management team, could have given this a low priority. And also importantly enough, you can see who has not voted. So for instance, Tracy could be part of our security team, and let's say her vote is very important. And if she is not voted, you can follow up with those individuals without bombarding everybody with emails and phone calls. So it really streamlines the follow-ups. It really streamlines the process, and it gives you end-to-end visibility of who is participating and who is not. Now, rather than manually following up with people, you can also let SelectHub do the follow-up. So you can put a deadline here that lets everybody know that they need to provide their input by the 30th of this month or whatever is the relevant deadline. And everybody gets a notification. People get an email saying, look, you have X number of hours remaining before these requirements get frozen. So please log in and put in your vote. And also when they log in, they can see here how many days they have left. Now, I talked about templates here. I wanted to point out something very important. The templates is something that you can also create your own templates. So SelectHub will give you their library of templates. We have over 100 different categories that we support: hardware, software, services, even telephone and telecom. However, there may be certain requirements from your finance organization, from your IT security organization, from your architecture team, which show up in pretty much, let's say, every software project or every hardware project. And you want to make sure that rather than manually copying and pasting those requirements from a Word or Excel sheet, you can create your own templates and you can enforce them within each of those projects. And this has a lot of relevance from a governance standpoint. And that also helps you centralize all of your best practices in one place and use them across all of your projects. All right, enough said about requirements. If there are any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat window. So I'll keep going. Now, let's say all the requirements are in there. Everybody has the requirements in there. And next thing you do is figure out what are the products, what are the vendors that might be a good fit. And that's where SelectHub gives you what we call a leaderboard. And the leaderboard for each of the categories tells you what are the requirements that are being used, the common requirements, and who are the vendors, who are the products that best meet those requirements. And if you want to understand why some vendor has a 50% score for a particular requirement versus a 75 or 100, you can click on the expanded view, you can click on expand comments, and you can see all the supporting information about why somebody was given a higher score versus a lower score. Once you have made that information, you can also go into our product database and start doing some more of your research. For instance, you may have a question that you want to ask a vendor. So you can click on that vendor's name, you can go to that record and click on what we call contact vendor. In the contact vendor, you can put in a question that you might have. For instance, do you support integration to SAP, right? That's let's say a basic question you have. But when you do that, you may not want your name or your title or your organization to show up and the vendor starts harassing you with phone calls and emails. So if you choose to, you can always keep your identity confidential. You can remove your name from the communication, you can remove your title, and even your organization name. Once the vendor responds, all of that information is also posted down below and is available as part of the audit trail. And the vendors, they can log in, they get a notification when you submit a question. They can log in into the vendor portal. They will see the inquiry has come in. They can respond to it right within SelectHub. Now, once you like or once you think that this vendor is a good enough vendor, you can shortlist them to your project by clicking on the Add to Project button. So going back to the project, a list of all the vendors that different stakeholders have shortlisted starts to show up. For instance, you can see that Sugar CRM was added by Ram, Salesforce was added by Luis, so all of this information is here. Now, once you have shortlisted all these vendors and products, you can do several things. You can do an RFI or an RFP. You can do a proof of concept or a request for demos from these various vendors. You can build a scorecard, an internal scorecard about what each of the vendors look like to different stakeholders of your organization. So let me give you an example. Let me start with an RFI or an RFP, and that will give you a feel for how you interact with vendors in a more structured manner. So let's take this particular RFI or RFP as an example. The way you create an RFI or RFP is it's a very much a push button process because you have done the heavy lifting already in the requirements module, in the vendor research, the scorecard, the whole process that you went through so far to get to a short list of vendors. You've done the heavy lifting already. Now it's a matter of clicking a few buttons and issuing an RFI or RFP. So the way you do that is everything is controlled by the status. So by default, when you create a new RFI or RFP, the status shows up as active, meaning this is a new RFI RFP, it's an ongoing RFI RFP, and the vendors that you're inviting down on the screen, I'll show you in a minute, they get a notification, they can choose to accept it. But sometimes, let's say you lose the funding, or you need to pause the RFI RFP or terminate it, you need to cancel it. You can change the status, and you no longer have to communicate manually to those 5 or 10 or 20 vendors. Everything is done through the system, you make your updates in one place, and the vendors are all kept on the same page. All right, so now let's go into what an RFP looks like. So everything is managed by a set of milestones as well, in addition to the status. What I mean by that is when you create the RFI RFP, you can put in what are the dates by which the stakeholders, the internal stakeholders need to review and provide input. When are you going to submit this to vendors? You can also let vendors know that they need to submit their questions by so-and-so timeline. They need to submit their final response by so-and-so timeline. You also have an NDA section where you can choose to have the vendors sign an NDA that you upload into our platform, and before they're able to see the contents of the RFI RFP, they need to sign an NDA. You can also choose what information you're comfortable sharing with these vendors. You can do a blind RFI, or you can do a full-blown, full-structured RFP where you get the NDA in place and you're sharing a lot more information with the vendors. Also, you can import your requirements with a single click, and each of those requirements can be the basis for a question within the RFI or the RFP. So you can control the question by saying, look, I don't want to include that in the RFI, or I want to include it, and I can put in multiple options that the vendor needs to select from. Or I can make it a yes-no answer, I can make it an open answer. So you are fundamentally controlling how you want the vendors to respond, Are they allowed to comment on the response? Are they allowed to make any attachments to the response? So all of that is managed by you. The next thing is, here is where you're shortlisting which vendors you want to include. Certain vendors you may not want because based on your research, you may feel like they are not a good fit for your organization. You can also make this an open RFI RFP where you send it out to all the vendors, anybody can respond, or you can say, look, I only want to send it to these 5 vendors. Along with the vendor list, you can also include any attachments, things like instruction sheet or a pricing sheet or a template for the response, any other instruction you want, you can include that. And you can also export out this RFI RFP once you have built it and put it on any third-party sites, like a Rocky Mountain BidNet or any of these RFI publishing sites. But you can also publish this through SelectHub. Now what happens is, when you go back to the RFI or RFP, once it's been submitted by the procurement team or the senior IT management, the vendors can put in their questions before they submit their final response. And there is a public Q&A area where the question from the vendor's identity is kept confidential, but the question from the vendor as well as the response you give them is shared with all the vendors. So that keeps all the vendors on the same level playing field. Number 2, once the responses start to come in, you can start looking at it, and based on certain business rules that you set up, SelectHub can give each vendor a rating and a ranking based on the response, or you can manually rate and rank each of the responses. So for instance, you can go from a rate of fail all the way to an excellent. And as you do that, fundamentally the score that each vendor gets starts to change. For example, here, Salesforce has a rating of 83% based on the response to this particular RFI or RFP. NetSuite has a rating of 70 for this particular RFI RFP. So you start to kind of eliminate certain vendors based on the response, and certain vendors start rising to the top. In the meantime, you can also share this with different members of your management team. So for instance, if your CFO or CIO, who may not be participating in this RFI or RFP, come and ask, how is this process going? You can always share the scorecard with them that lets them see how the different responses have come in from the vendors, what the internal rating and rankings have been, and you can share this with the CFO or the CIO or whichever stakeholder has requested that information. The other thing you can also do is, if you have questions about the response or the proposal from the vendor, you can click on Discuss with Vendor button, and it opens up a private, a confidential, a dialog box between your organization and the vendor organization, and you can go through back and forth all the questions you need information. You can also go through the contract negotiation process. You can attach any contract red lines, either Word documents or PDFs, and you can get them to sign it and then reattach it. And that entire process of negotiation and contract signing can be carried out in a way with full transparency, with full auditability, with all the vendor assurances being captured here in this platform. But once you have made a decision after the RFI RFP, you can go back into the project and you can go to the product section and say, look, I think based on the ratings that we did for the RFI RFP, we're going to give the contract to Salesforce. The second candidate might be SAP CRM for this particular project, and you can mark which are the products that are the final solution for this project, which vendors, which products got selected, and you can attach any relevant information like the NDA that was signed, the contract, and so on. So everything is there in one place. So that's fundamentally what SelectHub is all about in a nutshell. With that, I wanted to go back and summarize what it is that we do. Number 1, we provide a prescriptive workflow that allows you to bring together internal stakeholders and vendors and allow a selection process, allows an RFI or an RFP process to be done in a matter of days and weeks instead of weeks and months. Number 2, it gives you an end-to-end visibility and less legal liability due to the automatic audit trail. And number 3, it layers in all the industry data, vendor leaderboards, requirements templates, helping you bring more data to the table, engage the business unit in a more meaningful manner, and drive a more informed decision faster. If there are any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box or feel free to reach out to the SelectHub representative. They will follow up with you. And also, as for attending this webinar, SelectHub would offer you a free requirements template. If you would like to have access to it, please feel free to reach out to your SelectHub representative, and we will make the free requirements template available for you. With that, I wanted to say thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.